My grandfather, William Butler Yeats. My first memories are fragmentary and isolated and contemporaneous, as though one remembered some first months of the 7 days. It seems as if time had not yet been created for all thoughts connected with emotion and place or without sequence. I remember sitting upon somebody's knee, looking out of an Irish window at a wall covered with cracked and falling plaster. But what wall I do not remember, and being told that some relation once lived there, I am looking out of a window in London. It is at Fitzroy Road. Some boys are playing in the road, and among them a boy in uniform, a telegraph boy perhaps. When I asked who the boy is, a servant tells me that he is going to blow the town up, and I go to sleep in terror. After that come memories of Sligo, where I lived with my grandparents. I am sitting on the ground looking at a mastless toy boat with the paint rubbed and scratched, and I say to myself, hmm, great Malcolm. I say to myself, my great melancholy, in my, I say to myself in great melancholy, it is further away than it used to be. And while I am saying it, I am looking at a long scratch in the stern, for it is especially this scratch which is further away. Then one day at dinner, my great uncle William Middleton says, we should not make light of the troubles of children. They are worse than ours because we can see the end of our trouble and they can never see any end. And I feel grateful, for I know that I am very unhappy and have often said to myself, when you grow up, never talk as grown up people do of the happiness of childhood. I may have already had the night of misery when, having prayed for several days that I might die, I began to I began to be afraid that I was dying and prayed that I might live. There was no reason for my unhappiness. Nobody was unkind, and my grandmother was still, after so many years, my gratitude and my reverence. And my grandmother has still, after so many years, my gratitude and my reverence. The house was so big that there was always a room to hide in, and I had a red pony and a garden where I could wander, and there were two dogs to follow at my heels, one white with some black spots on his head, and the other with long black hair all over him. I used to think about God and fancy that I was very wicked. And one day, when I threw a stone and hit a duck in the yard, my mischance and broke its wing, I was full of wonder when I was told that the duck would be cooked for dinner and that I should not be punished. Some of my misery was loneliness, and some of it fear of old William Pollock's my grandfather. He was never unkind, and I cannot remember that he ever spoke harshly to me, but it was the custom to fear and admire him. He had won the freedom of some Spanish city for saving life, perhaps, but was so silent that his wife never knew it until he was near 80, and then from the chance visit of some old sailor. She asked him if it was true, and he said it was true, but she knew him too well to question, and his old shipmate had left the town. She too had the habit of fear. We knew that he had been in many parts of the world, for there was a great scar on his hand made by a whaling hook, and in the dining room was a cabinet with bits of coral in it, and a jar of water from the Jordan for the baptizing of his children, and Chinese pictures upon rice paper, and an ivory walking stick from India that came to me after his death. He had great physical strength and had the reputation of never ordering a man to do anything he would not do himself. He owned many sailing ships, and once, when a captain just came to another to anchor at Ross's Point, reported something wrong with the rudder, had sent a messenger to say, "Send a man down to find out what's wrong." The crew all refused, was the answer. And to that my grandfather answered, "Go down yourself." And not being obeyed, he dived from the main deck. All the neighborhood lined along the pebbles of the shore. He came up with his skin torn, but well informed about the rudder. He had a violent temper and kept a hatchet at his bedside for burglars, and would knock a man down instead of going to law, and I once saw him hunt a party of men with a horsewhip. He had no relation, for he was only a child, and being solitary and silent, he had few friends. He corresponded with Campbell of Islay, who had befriended him and his crew after a shipwreck, and Captain Webb, the first man who had swum the channel and who was drowned swimming the Niagara Rapids, had been a mate in his employ and a close friend. That is all the friends I can remember, and yet he was so looked up to and admired that when he returned from taking the waters at Bath, his men would light bonfires along the railway line for miles, while his partner William Middleton, whose father after the Great Famine had attended the sick for weeks and had taken cholera from a man he carried in his arms into his own house and died of it, and was himself visible to everybody, and a clever man that my grandfather came and went without notice. I think I confused my grandfather with God. For I remember in one of my attacks of melancholy praying that he might punish me for my sins, and I was shocked and astonished when a daring little girl, a cousin I think, having waited under a group of trees in the avenue, where she knew he would pass near 4 o'clock on the way to his dinner, said to him, "If I were you and you were a little girl, I would give you a doll." Yet, for all my admiration and alarm, neither I nor anyone else thought it wrong to outwit his violence or his rigor, and his lack of suspicion, and something helpless about him made that easy, while it stirred our affection. when I must have been still a very little boy, 7 or 8 years old perhaps, an uncle called me out of bed and one night to ride the 5 or 6 miles to Ross's Point to borrow a railway pass from a cousin. My grandfather had one, but though it but thought it dishonest to let another use it, but the cousin was not so particular. I was let out through a gate that the opened upon a little lane beside the garden, away from earshot of the house, and rode delighted through the moonlight, and awoke my cousin in the small hours trapping by tapping on his window with a whip. I was home again about 2 or 3 in the morning, and found the coachman waiting in the little lane. My grandfather would not have thought such an adventure possible, for every night at 8 he believed that the stable yard was locked, and he knew that he was brought the key. Some servant had once got into trouble at night, and so he had arranged that they should all be locked in. He never knew what everybody else in the house knew, that for all the ceremonious bringing of the key, the gate was never locked. Even today, when I read a King Lear in his image is always before me, and I often wonder if the delight in passionate men in my plays and in my poetry is more than his memory. He must have been ignorant, though I could not judge him in my childhood, for he had run away to sea when a boy, gone to sea through the household, as he phrased it, and I can but remember him with 2 books, his Bible and Faulkner's Shipwreck, a little green covered book that lay always upon his table. He belonged to some younger branch of an old Cornish family. His father had been in the army, had retired to become an owner of sailing ships, and an engraving of some old family place my grandfather thought should have been his, hung next a painted coat of arms in the little back parlor. His mother had been a Wexford woman, and there was a tradition that his family had been linked with Ireland for generations and once had their share in the old Spanish trade with Galway. He had a good deal of pride and disliked his neighbors, whereas his wife, Middleton, was gentle and patient and did many charities in the little back parlor among trees coats and shawled heads, and every night when she saw his asleep, went to round the salon alone with a candle to make certain there was no burglar in danger of the hatchet. She was a true lover of her garden, and before the care of the house had grown upon her, I would choose some favorite among her flowers and copy it upon rice paper. I saw some of her handiwork the other day, and I wondered at the delicacy of form and color, and at a handling that may have needed a magnifying glass in it was so minute. I can remember no other pictures that the Chinese paintings and some colored prints of battles in the Crimea upon the wall of a passage, and the painting of a ship at the passage and darkened by time. My grown-up uncles and aunts, my grandfather's many sons and daughters came and went, and almost all they said or did has faded from my memory, except a few harsh words that convinced me by a vividness out of proportion to their harshness that all were habitually kind and considerate. The youngest of my uncles was stout and humorous, and had a tongue of leather over the keyhole of his door to keep the draught out, and another whose bedroom was at the end of a long stone passage. She had a model turret ship in a glass case. He was a clever man and had designed the Sligo craze, but was slow going mad and inventing a vessel of war that could not be could not be sunk. His pamphlet explained because of a hull of solid wood. Only his only 6 months ago, my sister awoke dreaming that she held a wingless seabird in her arms, and presently she heard that he had died in his madhouse, for a seabird is the omen that announces the death or danger of a Pollexfen. An uncle, George Pollexfen, afterwards astrologer and mystic, and my dear friend came but seldom from Ballina. Once to a race meeting with two postilions dressed in green, and there was that young uncle who had sent me for the railway pass. He was my grandmother's favorite, and had, the servants told me, been sent away from school for taking a crowbar to bully. I can only remember my grandmother punishing me once. I was playing in the kitchen with a servant in horseplay, pulled my shirt out of my trousers in front just as my grandmother came in, and I, accused of I knew not what childish indecency, was given my dinner in a room by myself. But I was always afraid of my uncles and aunts. And once the uncle who had taken the crowbar to the bully found me eating lunch with my grandmother, which my grandmother had given me, and reproved me for it and made me ashamed. We breakfasted at time and dined at 4 in. It was considered self-indulgent to eat anything between meals, and once an aunt told me that I had reined at my pony and struck it at the same moment that I might show it off as I rode though through the town. And I, because I had been accused of what I thought a very dark crime, had a night of misery. Indeed, I remember little of childhood, but its pain. I have grown happier with every year of life, as though gradually conquering something in myself, for certainly my miseries were not made by others, but were a part of my own mind. And in the end, the formal request, if you have not yet, please subscribe our channel and press the like and bell button to get the press from us. Thank you for watching. Have a nice time. Goodbye.